there, it is drum month here on the channel, and today I'm going to demonstrate 3 ways to get your drums from the writing process inside the plugin into the mixing phase. I'll start over here with a quick and simple method, but it's somewhat limited, and finish over here with a more advanced, time-consuming method, but will offer you much more flexibility and possibilities, especially if you're handing it off to a mix engineer. In order to record the samples from my soft drums library, which I will be using to demonstrate all of these techniques, and I would love for you to pick that up over on my website. When we recorded those samples, we put 12 mics on the kit, and I've been putting 12 mics on the drum kit for 20 years. So when I get to the mixing phase, I want to have access to as many of those microphones as possible. But I know that that's not always practical, so let's start simple. Listen to that last fill. I thought that was pretty cool. That is the Slappy Joe snapshot without the slappy. I'm working on this song. It's not done. It's quite fun though. It's got soft drums, my peak, electric guitar, P-bass, my vocals, Wurlitzer shaker, and other percussion. But we don't care about all that. We care about drums today. This is what my drums sound like. Notice that everything is on one MIDI track. We've got kick, snare, hi-hat, crash. I think we've got some toms here, maybe. Also a tom, I'm kind of hitting them, kind of flamming them. Because I have them on redundant octaves, it allows me to do things like this. Can't see my fingers. I talk about this in other videos. The simplest method is obvious. It's to do whatever you can inside your plugin or your instrument and then print. In Pro Tools, that's as simple as right-clicking and hitting commit. That's going to print it into a stereo audio track. Every DAW does that in some way. What I've done here is I've adjusted my overhead and room. Again, this is somewhat of a sales pitch for my instrument. I do want you to buy it, but this is common in other libraries. I have individual mic control to an extent here, so I can build my mix and be done with it. When I print this, everything is baked in. If it's a demo, I'm not going to great lengths to separate everything out. If the drums aren't prominent in the mix, and they're kind of in the background, then I might settle on what I want and go with it. And if I love the sound that's coming back in the speakers, I'll stay with it. I've also found that if I record these drums first, every instrument that I play, every part that I play, those drums are part of the sound, and I am matching what I'm doing to those drums. So that means that those drums might more than likely fit with everything else. And so printing them stereo might be totally adequate. The pros, quick and easy. Commit, I'm at 32x. You can't beat that. We have my drum track ready to go. The cons, I can't make any adjustments to any individual instrument. I can, however, go in and grab an EQ. Let's say there's too much low end in the kick because I've got a lot of low end in the bass. I could simply go in and do a shelf on the kick drum. And let's say I wanted to make it feel a little more distance, a little warmer, a little darker. Maybe not the best words, but I could roll off the top. I like the way the compressor sounded on soft drums, but in this case, I could put a stereo drum compressor. I use the Waves. No, I'm debating whether or not to include this in the video. It's what I do. Not a super deep mixing tutorial here. The point I'm trying to make, not a ton of control if you do it this way. Let's hop back in here though. I do want to show you one thing. In case you did really like the slap reverb in here, you could turn that back on and you could go in and do individual controls for each one, right? I could send a bunch of snare to the reverb or delay. Cons to this, I don't have this reverb in my session to run everything else through. If it's a very clear effect that you like, print it. Now on to method number 2, keep them separated. I work hard on these chapter titles, as you can see. What I'm going to do here is separate each instrument out onto a different track. So I've got kick, snare, even though there are multiple snares. I have hi-hat, even though those are different MIDI notes, they're still the hi-hat. I worked hard to make these toms sound somewhat cohesive, so I may not separate them out into individual tom tracks, but you could do that if you wanted to. Kick, snare, hat, toms, and then our cymbals. I'm going to leave this as a stereo drum track, and I am going to duplicate this 5 times. I'll call this my stereo drums. I'm going to call this kick, snare, hat, toms, cymbals. So now I will go through, I'm gonna get rid of everything that's not a kick. So now when I listen to this should be just kicks. Snare, this is a snare flam. So I want everything there. You gotta pay attention here, you don't wanna mess this up. But if you do, you still have it in your stereo drums track. But that should be all of our hi-hats. But everything above here is a crash. Hey, I talked way too long in this section, so I'm going to condense. I wanna end up with kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, and cymbals. So on my kick MIDI track, everything that's not a kick, delete. Snare, everything that's not a snare, delete, and so on. I'm going to combine the toms into a stereo track. You might want to separate them, and I'm combining all the cymbals into a cymbals track. Now I can take these tracks, I'll go ahead and commit them. I'm going to commit the stereo drums as well so that I have it just in case I want to go back and reference it. I've got all of these tracks. They're stereo, which isn't necessary, but it is somewhat necessary because this snare includes the close, the overhead, and the room mics. But what this allows me to do is I can control how much reverb I send to the snare, to the kick, to the toms. When I go into the bus compression, I can make adjustments. This is definitely a better method, but there is a third method, which I'm calling Control Freak. So with Control Freak, this requires more effort, but I think it's worth it. I am going to duplicate the kick. I'm going to call this kick in. I'm going to call this other one kick out. I am going to duplicate my snare, and I'm going to call this snare top, and I'm going to call this snare bottom. I've got my hi-hat, and we'll keep that the same, and my toms. Probably want to separate them out, but I'm going to roll with it like this. I'm going to go to kick in, and in this instance, I like my kick sound. I'm going to mute the overhead and the room. So that is just the in. I'm going to mute the out. That particular kick drum just has a lot of slap on the top the way we did it. It's mostly the out that we use. But anyways, actually, I'm just going to take this now and I'm going to copy it over here and replace that. So now, only close mics. I'm also going to turn the compressor off on all of these. If I was sending this to somebody else, I'd get this volume up here. Again, a lot of attack. Now let's look at the snare. So we've got top. Let's mute the bottom and the overhead. And now we're going to duplicate this. This will be our snare bottom. That's at the bottom of the snare. And then we have hi-hat. We'll turn off overhead and room. Make sure we've just got close. In this case, it's probably best to just pan it straight up the middle because I could do my panning in Pro Tools. Let's do our toms. I'm being lazy here. You could separate them out if you wanted to, but I've got the panning the way I want them, so we'll get this going. Those are my close mics. I'm going to call this overhead. I am going to take this and I'm going to replace it with the initial stereo drums. And I'm going to copy it here, and then I'm going to copy it here. On the overheads, what I'm going to do, mute everything but the overhead. And then I'm going to call this track room, copy this over my stereo drum mix, and I am going to only turn on the rooms. My method breaks down because this particular preset doesn't use the rooms. So I'm going to go ahead and turn them on for each track. And just for fun, build a little mix. That's what they sounded like in the room. And now I can go through and build a mix. New angle and a confession. The track that you are hearing that I've been using to demonstrate these techniques, well, I printed right from Inside Soft Drums, stereo mix printed. I did that because I want to use this as a demo track, and I thought it was a little more honest of me to just show exactly what can be done inside of the instrument. Now, of course, with the overhead and close and in and out and room controls, I can shape the sound the way I want, but just wanted to let you know. I'm always about getting my drums or anything committed into waveforms, into audio, for lots of reasons. One, I'm more comfortable working that way, and for preservation purposes, you don't have to have the instrument to open it back up. Notice I'm not printing the overhead in the room because I still have the ability to go in and adjust these instruments. You know, if I make a radical adjustment to the snare, close mic, well, I might want to bring it down in the overheads in the rooms as well. But now I have almost the same amount of flexibility that I had when I tracked these drums. I can put an individual compressor on the overheads. I could go in and slam my rooms. I really dig this VU compressor. Let's see if it's got any presets. Something that says like, disgusting. Oh, I'll just go with the room. I could set up a reverb here if I wanted to. Snare, big chamber. So I can go to my snare here. I can send my bottom snare instead. You know, it's a different sound. Like say I turn this off, you get all my reverb from the snare from the bottom is different than if I get all of my reverb from the top. That's a meatier sound, and that probably sounds better by itself, but there might be times when you like to have that extra control. Same with the kick. You know, a lot of times you may not want a real snappy kick going through a reverb, but you might want to send the outside mic through this reverb. Now I have all the control in the world. Now when I manipulate the low end of this kick drum, I'm not worried about messing with the low end resonance of the floor tom, for example. This takes more time. Not every instrument can do this, but soft drums can. So I'd love for you to go check out soft drums. And if you have trouble programming realistic sounding drums, I suggest you watch this video. Talk soon.